Well, another 3 months has passed, and that means that we have a brand new batch of 13F filings from some of our favorite super investors. These filings allow us to see what US domiciled stocks these investors have been buying and selling in the latest quarter, in this case, the quarter ending June 30th, 2023. And it's not intended to be like a shopping list of investments that we should go out and buy or sell or anything like that, but it can be a phenomenal way to source really interesting investment ideas that you can dig further into. So in this video, let's go through some of the latest investment activity from some of my favorite super investors and the usual culprits in these quarterly videos that I do here on the channel. Those include, of course, Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, Mohnish Pabrai, Spier, and Li Lu. And as I often like to do in these videos, towards the end, we will look at a new investor who is not one of the usual people I cover in these quarterly updates, but who is a little less known and someone I still follow quite closely. Now, the 13F data will, of course, just give us US-based stocks. It doesn't give us an investor's full portfolio by any means, particularly if they do a lot of international investing, or if they have some of their portfolio in cash, or if they short stocks. All of that stuff won't be picked up by the 13F filings, but I will be jumping over across to TIKR, as I often do in these updates, which will show us any international filings that are available for non-US based stocks that these investors are buying. Now, TIKR won't pick up everything, but if, for example, a local regulatory filing is triggered, like with Warren Buffett's recent Japanese investments, where he's bought more than 5% of a Japanese company, those triggered a local filing in Japan, and those types of investments will show up on TIKR, so that should give us a little bit more detail around the edges as well. So with that introduction out of the way, let's get into some of the latest activity from these super investors. And of course, if you haven't subscribed to the Investing with Tom channel already, please be sure to do so. But let's get straight into it. Okay, let's start off here with the big dog, Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway. Now, as usual, a couple of things to keep in mind with Berkshire. This is not just Warren Buffett's portfolio. There are two other portfolio managers at Berkshire, Todd Combs and Ted Weschler. They manage a smaller chunk of Berkshire Hathaway's portfolio. So if anything's in kind of the top 10 or 15 investments at Berkshire, we can be pretty confident those are Warren Buffett stock picks. But anything further down the list gets a little murkier, and those are increasingly likely to be a Todd Combs or Ted Weschler type investment. Berkshire also has a very top-heavy portfolio, as we'll talk about in a sec. So once we get outside sort of the top 10 stocks, we're looking at less than 1% portfolio positions. Okay, so what have Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway been up to in the quarter ending June 30th, 2023? Well, in terms of the top 10 positions, we only have two changes, and that's a little bit of shuffling around with the two big oil companies that Berkshire are invested in. So the largest position remains Apple. We saw no change in that at all, and it's now 51% of Berkshire's US stock portfolio, which is just crazy. That position is worth almost $180 billion. So crazy large investment there for Berkshire. But continuing through the top 10, we have no change in Bank of America, American Express, or Coca-Cola. Like I mentioned, a bit of shuffling around with some of the oil companies. So we saw Chevron trimmed about 7%, and we saw Occidental Petroleum added to about 5%. Continuing through the top 10, no change in Kraft Heinz, Moody's, HP, or DaVita. Now, I mentioned towards the start here that some of the big positions in the Berkshire portfolio in the top 10, for example, are almost certainly a Warren Buffett position. I do believe DaVita is an exception to that. That has been a very long time Ted Weschler investment. He was invested in DaVita even before he joined Berkshire Hathaway. So I believe that stock is actually a Ted Weschler position and has continued to move up the portfolio as it's appreciated in value. Now, Berkshire owns over 50 US stocks, so I won't read through every single one here, but in terms of some of the other positions where there has been some activity, some buying or some selling, next one we have is Capital One Financial. Now, at this point, we're talking about 0.4% of the portfolio, and we're increasingly likely getting into Ted and Todd type investments here. But nonetheless, Capital One Financial was added to 25%. Next up, we have Activision Blizzard. That was cut 70%. I have actually covered Activision in quite some detail in a recent video on the channel. I believe a lot of that selling was Warren Buffett, and probably the remaining shares are actually Ted or Todd. I think there was, Buffett and one of the smaller money managers involved in Activision. So if you want to see more detail on that specific investment, I'll leave it linked up in one of the corners here. But 70% trim to Activision. We sort of expected to see that coming into this round of 13Fs. General Motors was trimmed 45% in the portfolio. That has gone from about a 0.45% position to about a 0.2 or so percent position. One of the more interesting things I would say that has popped up in this quarterly 13F for Berkshire is a bit of activity around some home builder stocks. So the first one we see here is DR Horton, which is a brand new position, represents about 0.2% of the Berkshire portfolio. Continuing down the list here, we saw a 39% trim of CE stock, Celanese Corp. We saw a 60% reduction in Global Life Inc. and a stock, again, that I've covered here on the channel a few times, a brand new one, and the other home builder that Berkshire have added is NVR. So a 0.02% position in NVR has popped up. They are very well known for being one of the kings of cannibals, I guess, a company that's just eaten up their own shares through very aggressive share buybacks and has done quite well as a result. So interesting to see that pop up for, I believe, the first time in the Berkshire portfolio this quarter. Continuing down the list, the final stock that Berkshire added this quarter was Lena Corp, a 0.01% position in the portfolio, and another home builder. So we're starting to see a theme of that kind of coming through here for Berkshire. And there were two stocks that were completely sold out of by Berkshire, which was McKesson Corp, previously a 0.25% position, now completely sold out of. And finally, Marsh and McLennan Companies, which was previously a very small 0.02% position in the portfolio, also completely sold down by Berkshire. Jumping over to TIKR now and looking internationally for Berkshire. In the core Berkshire Hathaway company kind of international filings, there's really no recent activity at all. The only stock that shows up there is IAG, Insurance Australia Group, obviously over in Australia, but it's a very small position and no activity. But if we dig a little deeper into Berkshire Hathaway's subsidiaries, they do occasionally, for whatever reason, put some of their stock investments kind of within different businesses that live under the Berkshire Hathaway banner. So for example, we have Berkshire Hathaway Energy with an investment in BYD, the electric vehicle company out of China. Berkshire have been continuing to sell down their BYD investment. It's been a very successful holding for them over the past decade or so. And as of the 18th of June, we saw them trim their position by about a further 9%. But that overall holding still remains worth about $3.1 billion. There is a second subsidiary of Berkshire that shows up here on TIKR with some international holdings. That is National Indemnity Corp, and that's kind of one of Berkshire's big insurance operations, and that's where, for whatever reason, they have been purchasing their Japanese trading companies that have been quite a public investment here for Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway. As of the 11th of June, we saw some increases across all 5 of the Japanese trading companies, ranging from additions of anywhere from 18% to about 23%. Again, I have videos here on the channel on some of Buffett's Japanese investments, so I will leave that again linked up in one of the corners if you're wanting to learn a little bit more about those holdings. Okay, jumping now to Warren Buffett's right-hand man, that is 99-year-old Charlie Munger. And Charlie, of course, has quite the reputation at this point for being the master of doing nothing, buying what he believes to be good businesses at reasonable prices and just kind of sitting on his backside and letting them hopefully compound away. We saw a continuation of that yet again here from Charlie this quarter. And this, I should say, isn't like Charlie Munger's personal portfolio or anything. So we won't see the likes of Costco, which, Munger has been on the board of for a long time. And he's been, very publicly a big shareholder in Costco. We're instead looking at the Daily Journal Corporation portfolio, which in itself is a public company, and its stock holdings are managed by Charlie Munger. So in terms of the US holdings, we have only 4 of them and no change in any. So Wells Fargo is 41.5% of the US portfolio, Bank of America is 40%, Alibaba is 15.3%, and US Bancorp is about 2.8% of the US portfolio. No buys or sells in any of those businesses. Looking over on TIKR at the international holdings, we don't see anything additional pop up here for Daily Journal and Charlie Munger. It's been pretty widely rumoured that Daily Journal may have an investment in Tencent. We know for sure that they at least used to have an investment in BYD, but Daily Journal are too small to warrant any regulatory filings with those companies. So unfortunately, we don't have much of a view into what Munger is doing outside of the US. Next up, we have Mohnish Pabrai of Pabrai Investment Funds, and this is the 13F, which I think surprised the most people this quarter. We had some pretty radical changes in Pabrai's US portfolio. So he sold all of the previous investments that he had based in the US. Those are Micron, a stock that he has been in since the fourth quarter of 2018. He dumped it completely. It was previously 79% of the US portfolio, and he's now completely out of it. We also have Brookfield Corporation, which he's completely sold out of. It was previously a 20% of the US portfolio position. And for a few quarters, he's had this very tiny sort of historic position in Seritage Growth Properties. So he has finally sold the sort of small handful of shares that he had in Seritage as well. And in terms of what Pabrai has gone on to actually do with the money that he got from selling those 3 stocks, he has absolutely backed up the truck on 2 big coal companies, which I really did not see coming. Pabrai has been quite public in trying to transition towards higher quality, long-term compounder, growing pie type businesses. So these investments to me seem like a little bit of a throwback to some of the 50-cent dollar, really cheap, potentially more volatile in earnings type companies. So the 2 stocks that he bought were Alpha Metallurgical Resources, that is now 81% of the US portfolio. Keep in mind, Pabrai does a lot outside of the US, so it's definitely not 80% of his fund in reality, but at least in the US, 81% of the portfolio, not quite a $60 million position. And then we also have Consol Energy, another coal company, about a $13.8 million position, and makes up the balance of the US portfolio, so about 18.8%. So some monster changes in the portfolio there for Pabrai in the US. Definitely let me know down in the comments what you think of some of those recent changes from Mohnish. And looking internationally for Mohnish Pabrai, he does have a few additional holdings show up where he's had to make international filings. So we have Racist Logistics, Edelweiss Financial Services, Suntec Realty, and Rain Industries. In terms of stocks that have recent changes, we have Racist Logistics. His number of shares in that company have actually doubled. They've gone up 100%. If you haven't been following along with Racist Logistics, they recently did quite a large capital raise where existing shareholders could buy quite significantly discounted new shares in Racist to help them raise some money for additional sort of business activities. So not too surprised to see that pop up here for Mohnish. That update was on the 24th of July, so a pretty recent one. His share count doubled. The market value certainly will not have doubled because races have diluted, but nonetheless $164 million position. So I believe probably the biggest holding in Mohnish's fund, a lot of which is capital gains. It's been a very successful investment for him so far. The only other one where we have some changes is with Edelweiss Financial Services. So as of the end of June, he had bumped that position up about 8.8% in terms of the number of shares he owns. Moving right along to a good friend of Mohnish, that is Guy Spier with Aquamarine Capital. Guy, much like Charlie Munger, is building quite the reputation for being the master of doing nothing and just sitting back and letting the businesses do their thing. And yet again, we saw that from Guy Spier this quarter. So no change in any of his US positions, no buys, no sells. The top 5 positions remain Berkshire Hathaway, American Express, Ferrari, MasterCard, and Bank of America. Beyond that, we have an additional share class in Berkshire, so he's got both the B shares and the A shares. He continues to hold Micron, Moody's, Heritage Growth Properties, Alibaba, Daily Journal, and Google. And looking internationally, we do have 2 further stocks show up, which is Indian Energy Exchange and iTech AB, which we saw about a 0.5% reduction in iTech AB. So not quite sure what's going on there. Very small change. I think it's reasonably well known at this point that Guy does have some other international holdings as well. The likes of BYD, I think, is one of, if not the largest holding in his fund, but Aquamarine, not quite big enough a shareholder in BYD to warrant any sort of regulatory filing. So we don't get too much of a view into what Guy is doing there. If I had to bet, I'd say he's probably just sitting back like he does with a lot of his other stocks, but we don't know that for sure. Next up, we have Li Lu of Himalaya Capital Management, one of now 2. For a long time, he was the only one, but now one of 2 money managers to ever invest money on behalf of Charlie Munger. So he's built quite the reputation in that manner, and he's also built quite the reputation for just having phenomenally good returns over time. So Li Lu does invest quite a bit internationally, predominantly in China, as I understand it. It certainly used to be the case. I believe that's still the case. But he does still have a few US holdings that we can get into, and we do have some activity this quarter. So largest positions remain Bank of America, about 29% of the US portfolio. We have Google at 20.5%, Berkshire at 17%, and an additional class of Google stock at 17%. So if you add those 2 classes of Google stock together, that's actually the largest US position. We then have Apple at 8.2%, and all of those stocks had no change at all. So no buys, no sells. Down the bottom end of the portfolio, we do have East West Bancorp. This was a new stock for Li Lu last quarter, and he's continued buying it. So he's added 20% to that position. And finally, the big sort of breaking news here for Li Lu is he, like Mohnish Pabrai actually, has completely sold out of Micron. He has been in that since Q4 2019. It was previously 20% of the US portfolio, and he's completely out. He's sold 100% of his Micron shares. So pretty fascinating to see Li Lu exit Micron. Looking at Mohnish's 13F, I was potentially wondering whether he just sold out of Micron to put money into the 2 new coal stocks and to free up capital for that. Seeing Li Lu also sell it, though, maybe confirms that potentially something's changed with the thesis, the investment case around that business. I know that it's fairly publicly known at this point that Mohnish Pabrai and Li Lu actually collaborated on the Micron investment idea. So to see them both get out suggests to me that something has probably changed in their thinking around the company, as opposed to it just being an opportunity cost thing for Mohnish, for example, where he thought the money was, better put to use in the coal companies versus Micron. With them both selling out, it is becoming increasingly clear that probably something in their view has changed. Looking internationally for Li Lu, like I said, he does do a lot of investing in China. We unfortunately only see one additional stock, though, show up here in TIKR, which is Postal Savings Bank of China. Interestingly, that is a $791 million position, which is larger than anything he owns in the US. So that kind of puts that into context, hopefully. And the other number I should put out there is that supposedly Himalaya Capital, Li Lu's fund, has about $14.1 billion in assets under management. We only see $1.8 billion in the US, so the vast majority of the portfolio is invested overseas. And in terms of Postal Savings Bank of China here for Li Lu, we haven't got any update on that position since the end of December 2022, so no recent activity from what I can gather. Now, the last investor I want to cover here is one that is not in the usual quarterly updates here on the channel, but he is an investor that I follow quite closely, and I always enjoy reading his annual letters out of his fund, and I often talk about them here on YouTube when it comes to Berkshire Hathaway, and that is Chris Bloomstran of Semper Augustus. Now, I think Chris Bloomstran has a very good case for being the guy that likely understands more about Berkshire Hathaway than any other investor I know besides perhaps Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. He follows the company extremely closely, tracks Berkshire's intrinsic value in his view with a few different methods of calculating it in his annual letters. He's appeared on numerous podcasts as kind of a Berkshire expert and investing expert more generally, and he's a guy I have a lot of respect for and I follow very closely. So in terms of what Chris Bloomstran has been up to this quarter, quite a bit of activity. Now, outside of the big Berkshire position for Chris Bloomstran right up top of the portfolio, he is reasonably diversified as far as the investors that I follow sort of go. So quite a bit of activity and quite a few smaller positions, so sort of 1.5% to 3% type holdings, but some interesting stuff to talk through nonetheless. So the biggest position by far and away is Berkshire Hathaway. He has both classes of stock in there, Class A and Class B. Class B is about 19% of the portfolio and Class A is about 16% of the portfolio. So right there you more than a third of the portfolio just in Berkshire. But there is some interesting stuff as you continue to work down the list. So the third biggest position is Mercury General Corp, which he added to 90% this quarter. So big add there for Chris Bloomstran on that position. Continuing through the top 10, he trimmed Olin Corp by 2%. He added to Dollar General 76%. He added to Newmont Mining 4%. Same with Kincross Gold Corp, added to that one 14%. Paramount Global, he added to 15%. So there's a bit of overlap even between Chris Bloomstran's portfolio and Berkshire Hathaway's portfolio outside of, the big Berkshire position that he owns directly. So Paramount Global is a good example of that. And rounding out the top 10, we have an 8% add to HF Sinclair Corporation and an 11% add to Alaska Air Group. Now, like I say, Chris is quite diversified and does seem to do quite a bit of rebalancing of the portfolio each quarter, so I won't go through all of the activity here, but I will mention that there was one stock that he completely sold out of, which was Hexcel Corp, previously about a 1.2% position, and completely exited in the most recent quarter for Chris Bloomstran. And just finally, in terms of international investment activity outside of the US, we have nothing at all showing up for Chris's fund, Semper Augustus. He may well own some international stocks where he just hasn't triggered those regulatory filings, but unfortunately not too much visibility into that at all. So there you have it. Those are some of the updates and my highlights from this latest batch of quarterly 13F filings from some of my favorite super investors. If you did enjoy it and haven't subscribed to the channel already, please be sure to do so. And let me know down in the comments below some of your highlights from this quarter's batch of 13F filings. And let me know if there's any 13F filings from investors that I missed that you found really interesting and you'd like me to take a look at. But that's all I've got for this one, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.